is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
We've got a couple of massive games coming up in the women's college basketball tournament. LSU versus Virginia Tech, and the big headliner here, Iowa versus South Carolina. We're going to break down both those games in the Final Four with Justin Carter for today, getting his read on the Final Four on the women's side of things and getting you ready for what should be an electric slate of games on Friday. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire. Joined here, as mentioned, by Justin Carter. You can find him on Twitter at JustCards. You can find him on Her Hoop Stats, RotoBaller, 16,000 other places. It seems like, Justin, you are all over the place. Welcome to the show. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on here. Excited to talk about some women's hoops.
Me too. I'm excited. It's going to be a blast. These games so far, this tournament has been good. Bracket's been okay for me, so I'm still sweating things out. I know I can't make up a lot of ground given everyone has South Carolina, and I do too, but, I feel pretty good about things. A lot better than my men's bracket for sure. If you're looking for our men's breakdown of the Final Four, that podcast is up. We talked to Dr. Ed Feng earlier on this week, getting his read on the Final Four, futures, stuff like that. If you're listening before opening day for baseball as well, that podcast went up yesterday. So you can find those on the Covering the Spread podcast feed and over on the FanDuel YouTube page. Now, later on the show, I'll be talking about Formula One in Australia. And Justin, I feel like I flubbed the timing here. I should have done NASCAR today instead of tomorrow because you do NASCAR work as well. So I feel like I should have flip-flopped those to get your NASCAR thoughts for Cup Series and Xfinity in Richmond and the trucks down in Texas, your neck of the woods, your old neck of the woods.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really dug into this week in NASCAR yet, so I'm glad that isn't being sprung on me or something.
Right.
But yeah, I'm excited tomorrow to dig into all the NASCAR stuff for the weekend too.
Yeah. Awesome week for you. Big week for you between all the NASCAR stuff going on and the women's Final Four. Now, Justin, we're going to talk about those specific games here in a second and break down what you see in them based on the odds over at FanDuel Sportsbook. But before we do so, because this is our first time having you here on the show, I did want to dig in a bit to your process, how things work for you. What steps do you go through to research when you're trying to formulate your thoughts on a women's college basketball game?
Yeah, so my women's college basketball kind of betting process isn't really as kind of complex or well-defined as it is for other sports, just because there's a lot of early line movement on women's college basketball games, so it's a lot more kind of gut check.
Yeah.
Her Hoop Stats, we have a kind of matchup predictor tool that kind of gives us what the spreads kind of should be based on all of our data. And so in other sports, I look at multiple different kind of data sources.
Right.
But just because it's so much faster here, if you want to get, on the bets before the lines just go wild. It's just a lot of kind of looking at our projections, seeing where our numbers are saying the lines are off, and kind of mostly kind of betting those.
Yeah, and I think that the tough part there is, like you mentioned, numbers are moving very fast, which means you have less time to aggregate all those sources. Not all data sources update as quickly as we'd like always, which complicates things too. So if you want to use like a wisdom of the crowd type approach, which is something we talk about a lot here on the show, it's tougher to do so if you're getting extreme movement right away, which it sounds like is what you're seeing here. So I think it makes sense to kind of whittle things down just kind of out of necessity. If you want to not bet into a mature market and stuff like that, I think you kind of have to go that way. Now, you mentioned Her Hoop Stats. Of course, you do write for them, and it sounds like they're probably the premier place to go for data when trying to bet on women's college basketball. I'm guessing a lot of people listening to the show here have gotten hooked a bit from this tournament with how fun it's been. And, only 3 games left for this year, but looking forward to next year, if people want to do their own research, try to formulate their own models, or just, be better informed in betting the women's side of things, which sites would you highlight as being good ones for data they can turn to?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're looking for something that's just kind of easy and free, I know Sports Reference has launched women's college basketball stuff over the last few months. I haven't dug too much into that yet because a lot of that stuff's available on Her Hoop Stats also. I know at Her Hoop Stats we kind of add a little more to that by showing how teams rank and all tiering everything and all that. And we have some matchup tools that you can put the two teams in there and see predictions for home, neutral, and away predictions for them and totals and all that I don't think you could probably get at Sports Reference. And then there's also, if you're looking for something a little on the pricier end, there's a site called CBB Analytics that has all kinds of like shot data and defensive data. And so if you really wanted to kind of dig in and look in the nitty gritty of like how is this team at post defense versus what's this team, other teams, offensive skills, there's that. Although that I think that's more, better for kind of non-betting analysis usually is for betting analysis, but it's a good place to kind of get more data. More data is what you want.
Right. And if you're writing for a site called Hoop Stats, obviously you're leaning on data a lot. Data is a big part for you, but you also watch a lot of games. How much for you is weighing what the data says versus what you see with your eyes, given how much you're consuming on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'll look at the data and then I'll kind of think like, okay, I've seen these teams play. Is what I'm seeing in this data what I should be seeing in this data? I think last night, for example, I think the spread on the women's NIT game was like 8.5. Our data said it was like 8.2, but I had watched Kansas and Washington enough to know that like Washington's offense was really not good, and they weren't going. It was going to be a blowout, and it was.
So basically, what you're doing is using the numbers as a baseline, and then taking your eye test from there to decide, do I agree with this or do I not? So like the numbers are the baseline and then you go from there. Is that kind of the correct interpretation?
Yeah.
I think that's how we all should do it. We all have, at least again, we're a pretty data driven podcast here. A lot of people have their own numbers, their own thoughts. That's the baseline. It's never gospel. It's never, no model is perfect. So I think that having that element in there of watching the games is important too. Okay, let's talk about some games here and break down the first game on Friday night. Justin, we got LSU taking on Virginia Tech right now. LSU, a 1.5 point favorite. Total here is 133.5 and projects to be a very tight game. So what do you see in this game in terms of the spread, the money line? Any lean for you there, Justin?
Yeah, so coming into this tournament, I really didn't believe in LSU. They only lost twice all year. They had, so that sounds good, but then they played one of the weakest non-conference schedules in the country. But I've really changed my mind over the last few weeks about them. They blew out Michigan by 24. They held Utah to about 20 points under their scoring average. And our Her Hoop Stats model has them as 5.4 point favorites in this one. Mm-hmm. So for me, I think that 1.5 point spread on there, I'm taking the LSU side of that.
Have they done enough to sway you where you think the 4.5 is correct there?
Yeah, I think I'm concerned about them against teams as good offensively as South Carolina and Iowa.
Yeah.
But Virginia Tech's not quite at that level. They rank outside the top 20 in offensive rating. And so, this to me feels like a game where LSU is kind of clearly the better team, even though they're a 3 seed versus a 1 seed.
Yes, that spread is again 1.5. So Justin does like LSU there, minus 115 on the 1.5 on LSU. You talked about LSU's defense. You talked about Virginia Tech's offense not being super, super stellar. Total in this game is 133.5. What's your read on that market?
This is one that I've really been back and forth on, and I think I'm probably mostly just going to stay away from that one, just because I think the problem is Virginia Tech plays at such a slow pace.
Sure.
They're 251st in pace that if LSU's defense is just like a little better than expected, I mean, this could get really ugly.
Right.
And it could really easily kind of go under. But LSU's also, I don't know. I mean, I said I trusted LSU now.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a part of me that wonders if like Virginia Tech might be able to score on them. So I don't know. This is one that's kind of messy for me in terms of the total because I think it could go either way. Yeah.
I think it's the most freeing feeling in the world, realizing I don't have to bet this. You know, when I am conflicted like that, to me, it is liberating to be like, I'll pass and just I'll ride with my LSU -1.5 ticket there. So it sounds like LSU -1.5, the one bet we're liking in that first Friday game. Second Friday game is the headliner here. We got South Carolina taking on Iowa. South Carolina, an 11.5 point favorite. Total in this game is 149.5. And despite the fact that South Carolina is a big favorite here, Justin, we've heard a lot about Caitlin Clark. She has shot out of her mind in this tournament. Now, we know that she's very good. But the question that I have for you as someone who's watched this Iowa team all year and watched South Carolina's defense is this run from Caitlin Clark sustainable? And what's your view on the 11.5 point spread considering that analysis?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Clark herself was doing is sustainable. We have a pretty long sample of her just doing crazy things with the basketball over and over and over again. My concern is if like the rest of Iowa's team can kind of be there for her. I mean, I think Clark can score 30 and Iowa can be blown out still, just because the SC defense is just so good. And also the Iowa defense isn't that good. They're 190th in defensive rating, so like this could get ugly. So I like betting South Carolina, even though 11.5 is pretty big for a Final Four, just because they have so much more size. They're such a better defensive team. They can let Caitlin Clark do her thing, shut the rest of the 4 players on the court down, and cruise, I guess. I don't know.
It's a really interesting dynamic there where you buy into what she's done, but still think that the 11.5 is an appropriate number, potentially one you're willing to lay there as well. And I think that it's important to remember there are 4 other players on the court, and that's not to downplay what they've done. Obviously, they played very well throughout this tournament, but 11.5 is there for a reason with South Carolina. I think that's pretty interesting. Now, you mentioned the offense for Iowa, offense for South Carolina, the defense for Iowa. Total in this game does reflect that 149.5. Is that still too low? What's your read on that total for this game?
I think that total's too high, honestly.
Okay.
I think the South Carolina defense, they allow 51.1 points per game. I know Iowa's offense is good, and I know Caitlin Clark's the best offensive player in the country, but South Carolina's defense, I just struggle to see this being a high scoring game because of how good they are defensively.
And that's a big number, 149.5. The under there is -105. Is it a big enough number where you're willing to take the under there, or is that more of a lean on your end?
I'll probably put a little on the under in this one. Yeah. I'm not, with Caitlin Clark on the court, it's not something I'm super confident in, but it's something that like, just based on having watched the South Carolina defense all year and seeing what they've done and how they've held almost every opponent under their scoring average, I think I definitely lean this being lower scoring.
Okay. And then with the 11.5 point spread there, is that one where you feel like you feel good enough about it to lock that one in with South Carolina at 11.5?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I know our Hoops X model has it at 13.1, so
perfect.
There's a little, yeah. Iowa could shock us here, but I'm more confident in South Carolina just winning this one comfortably.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so Justin liking both LSU -1.5, South Carolina -11.5, and potentially checking out the under on the South Carolina-Iowa game. Now, you think that South Carolina should roll in this game, which turns us towards the futures market. They are -290 to win the national championship. The second shortest odds, LSU at 6-1. It sounds like, based on what you were saying, LSU could struggle pretty heavily against a team like South Carolina, given the offense that they have. Do you think that there is still value in South Carolina at -290? Anything else in this market, or does it appear pretty efficient overall to you?
I mean, I think South Carolina minus 290 is it's a boring bet, but I mean, they're the overwhelming favorite for a reason.
Right.
They already beat LSU in the regular season by 20 or so, I think, too. I can't remember the exact score. So in a matchup like that, they'd be the clear favorites. I think the one thing that intrigues me, though, about these odds is I know I just talked about Iowa probably losing, but at plus 850, if they beat South Carolina, they're the obvious favorite in a national title game.
Right.
And so I think that's an interesting risk to me right now, is to bet Iowa at that amount.
Okay.
Just because, obviously the odds are going to change drastically if Iowa does get past South Carolina. So I think there's some risk, a lot of risk there, but it could be something that pays off.
Right now, the Iowa money line for the South Carolina game specifically is plus 540. So I think that the way you could play this is take the championship outright instead. If you like Iowa and think they can keep this game close, take the plus 850 versus taking the money line at plus 540 for the South Carolina game and taking that additional upside there, especially if, like you said, Justin, you would favor Iowa versus both LSU and Virginia Tech. And I think that the other incentive here is that when you have a team that does shoot a lot of threes, that can be pretty volatile. But volatility is not a bad thing. Volatility, if it includes a path to upside, can be a big positive. So I think the plus 850 in Iowa is pretty intriguing. You do think that Iowa would be the pretty big favorite over LSU and Virginia Tech if they were to win this game?
I'm not sure in terms of like what the betting markets will say
but you would.
For that, but I would call them the favorite. Yeah. I mean, I think LSU has struggled when they face the one elite offense they faced, which was South Carolina. They were just kind of blown out of the building. So I think Iowa should have an advantage against them. And then Virginia Tech is Virginia Tech. I don't know. I don't want to insult Virginia Tech, but I just think they don't do as many things as an elite level as the other three teams do.
Yeah.
So.
Alrighty. Well, this should be a fun night of sports. Friday, kicking off Friday with both those games, LSU, Virginia Tech, and Iowa versus South Carolina. Justin, it has been a pleasure to have you on the show here for today. A delight to pick your brain. Looking forward to checking out her hoop stats to dig into that. Again, find Justin's work. You can find him on Twitter at JustCarts, JUSCARTS. Check him out at her hoop stats and RotoBaller as well for the NASCAR content. Justin, pleasure to talk to you today. Have fun watching those games on Friday and have fun at the national championship too. And hopefully we can get you again on here at some point to talk some more college basketball, talk some NASCAR, and just pick your brain again. Thank you, Justin. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Alrighty. Again, find Justin on Twitter at JustCarts to check out all of his fantastic work across women's college basketball and NASCAR. Should be a fun one on Friday. As mentioned, we're going to talk about some Formula One in Australia here in just 1 second. But first, whether your bracket is busted, still alive, or you're just looking for another way to get involved in March Madness, FanDuel has you covered. That's why FanDuel and Xfinity Mobile are partnered to give you a chance to win a share of $10,000 for both the men's Final Four and the national championship game. So $20,000 in total cash prizing. All you have to do is answer prop pick'em questions around in-game action inclusive of Xfinity Mobile themed questions. And the best part is it is free to play. Fans that answer the most questions correctly will win a share of the $10,000 grand prize for that round's contest. The second round of this contest locks on Saturday at 6:30. So head to FanDuel now to get in the action. To enter, go to FanDuel.com/free/contest/Xfinity Mobile Pick'em Roll, or FanDuel.com/free/contest/Xfinity Mobile Pick'em Roll. No purchase necessary. Age and location restrictions apply. Void or prohibited. See full terms at FanDuel.com. Xfinity Mobile is not sponsored or offered this promotion in any way. Let's finish up here by talking about some Formula One in Australia. That is the third race of the year. Again, we'll talk about NASCAR tomorrow, breaking down the Cup Series of Richmond, Xfinity Series of Richmond, and the Truck Series at Texas as well. But looking at the markets for Australia this week, there is one driver my model thinks is undervalued in the market at FanDuel, and that guy is Lance Stroll. Stroll, of course, drives for Aston Martin. And Aston Martin has been the big headliner so far this year because they came out, got a couple of podiums right away, and turned some heads. They've, I think, been faster than Ferrari and Mercedes so far. So when you look at these markets, you will see that Stroll's teammate, Fernando Alonso, justifiably very high up there in the markets. He has the third highest win odds. He has the second highest, or tied for the second highest top 6 odds. He has the third highest podium odds. The market loves Alonso, and that's fair. He's a very good driver. I think the market should be higher on Stroll. Stroll has longer podium, top 6, and points odds than not just Alonso, but also than the Ferrari and Mercedes drivers. That part, I think, is false. It should not be the case. In Bahrain, Stroll had a better median lap time than both the Mercedes cars and Carlos Sainz, and he's actually not super far behind Charles Leclerc there. He did that while driving with a broken wrist from a biking accident. So very impressive run there for Stroll. And then when they went to Saudi Arabia, he retired early, but he had the speed there. I think he was running 4th at the time. He was running 4th before he pitted. So he had speed there, got a good start, and was driving well. Right now, looking at the markets over at FanDuel Sportsbook, Stroll plus 500 to podium. He is minus 195 to finish in the top 6 and minus 300 to finish inside the points. I show value on all those. I had Stroll 83% to finish inside the top 10. Applied odds there are 75%. His top 6 odds for me are 70% versus 66% implied. Podium odds a bit thinner. At 5-1, you need a bit of chaos to get in front there because you need probably one of the Red Bulls or Alonso to have some issues because I don't think he'll beat Alonso on speed straight up. So I think that's at least a consideration, just not as big of a value as what you get for the other 2 markets. So what I'd want to do here personally is scale this bet and scale it responsibly, where you put the majority of your wager on the top 10 and the top 6 markets so that you can profit if he, at least in the eyes of my model, lives up to expectations. Then if you want to add in the podium bet too, do so just in a smaller fashion. Because again, 5-1, pretty close to fair value based on what I'm seeing. Not quite as sold on that one. So if you're looking to bet Australia for Formula One, I would say do it via the Aston Martin. Specifically, I think that Stroll is the one guy who's a bit undervalued. You can also bet on which team will win. I do show a bit of value on Aston Martin to win. They are 6-1 right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. I do show a bit of value on that. I'm not as convinced. I think my model might be underselling Red Bull still a bit here, so had not taken that. But I do think there is value in Stroll, specifically the T6 minus 195, the T10 and minus 300 bets. I think both those pretty good values if you want some action on Formula One in Australia. Again, NASCAR discussion for Richmond and Texas coming up tomorrow on the show. We'll talk about some MLB. Shorter slate tomorrow, which is why I want to filter in the NASCAR as well. We'll try to get some strikeout props in there, talk about some money lines across baseball to get you ready for day number 2 in Major League Baseball. That is all that we have here for today, though, on the show. Want to give a big thank you once again to Justin Carter. Find him on Twitter at JustCarts, and again, find his work at Her Hoop Stats and RotoBaller. And again, the data site he mentioned was Her Hoop Stats. If you want to dig in yourself for these games this year or next year, if you want to dive in to women's college basketball as well. I'm on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. If you have any more questions, again, Men's Final Four podcast over on the Covering the Spread podcast feed and on the FanDuel YouTube page. Opening day MLB is there as well, along with tomorrow's MLB will be up tomorrow on the Covering the Spread podcast feed. Make sure you're subscribed, and if you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating. We appreciate those of you who have done so already. Good luck to all of you betting across Major League Baseball opening day. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow for more baseball and some NASCAR. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.